everyone, and welcome to the conclusion of my Voyager painting. The footage you see here was taken on my live stream over on Twitch, and this is one of the longest paintings that I ever have tackled so far. It occurred over the course of several nights, and you've seen the previous versions where I've painted the base layers in acrylics, followed by a layer in oils for the background and some of the other elements. And as you can see here, I'm working on the planet, trying to get the oceans and islands in order. Right now I'm using oil paint. The brand that I use right now is Gamblin. I have several others that are in the mix too, but I'm pretty happy with that one. And for this video, I'm going to basically do a speed version that concludes the entire painting. In the previous videos, I've done both acrylic and oils, but the final piece here is done just in oils. And you'll have to pardon me, I'm actually talking, of course, to the chat during the live stream, so you'll see me looking over at the camera occasionally on here. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out, and it worked out very well with the underpainting. In person, the colors are very vibrant, which was the goal of the painting. And I managed to capture the spaceship, the Voyager from Star Trek Voyager, in pretty good detail, which we'll get to later on in this video. So I hope you enjoy. For each time I came through to do another layer on this painting, I applied a little layer of a clear that was basically made up of linseed oil and liquid. This allowed me to paint wet on wet for most of the major sequences here that you see here. So you can get really great blending and some fantastic details. Right now I'm trying to capture the light hitting the planet from this bright nebula off in the background. It's almost as bright as if the planet had its own star. So each of the bodies of water is getting little bits of highlights, trying to make it look like the light's hitting the world from that side. After I took care of the atmospheric effect, kind of a cloud layer along the edge of the planet, I've come back in to detail some of the land masses with little bits of mountains and valleys, just to give it a little bit more life than just the straight color that was on it. And now we're getting into painting the Voyager itself. First, I began by taking all of the darkest points and details on the ship itself, and these are things like phaser banks and other small details. I'm going in with a very dark color so that I can still capture them after I do several passes on the ship hull itself. Right now, as you see it, it's mainly just the drawing that we started with maybe a layer of acrylic in grays, essentially. So I want to make sure I capture all these details as I continue to add layers of paint over it. You can see on the paint palette on the right I've already prepared several colors, different shades of gray that I know I want to use for the ship. This is a good practice because it allows you to grab any color that you need at any given point in time and just continue painting the ship itself. Occasionally I'm touching up things that maybe I didn't like so much or wanted to kind of blend in a little bit, so I'm always working with a brush in one hand and a cloth or some other tool on the other to massage the elements as they go. And as we build up, I'm continuing to add darker bits of detail, elements and shadows, knowing full well that I'm probably going to be painting over it with another couple of layers in sort of a glaze fashion. At this point, I'd actually let the painting dry for a couple of days before taking on the next step. As you can see, I'm able to paint right over those dark marks that I did in the previous step, so I can get in some of the better shadowing details and trying to really render the ship itself instead of just kind of dealing with the individual lines, panels, and other bits. And I'm just going right over the stuff that I previously worked on. I'm working in a glaze, so the colors aren't entirely opaque, although I do several times actually paint over things that I wish I hadn't. This is what happens when you're doing paintings like this. I do find that doing technical illustrations in oil can be a little challenging, so I'm learning as much as anybody. But overall, I think that this ended up looking really good in the end. You got to get through these phases before you can get to really having a ship sing in your painting. And again, because I've pre-mixed my colors, several shades of the gray that I want to use on the ship, I'm able to come in and work both the shadows and the highlights as I want to. And it really gives you a lot of latitude in painting the ship in one go. I do try to keep separate brushes for the light colors and the dark colors, so it allows you to work fairly quickly without having to keep cleaning the brushes every time you pick a new color, or contaminate your brush with a dark when you grab a light. Sometimes I can't do that. Maybe I'm using the one brush that I really want to use, so you just have to kind of be careful to make sure you clear it out just enough before you proceed with a new color. And now we get to the classic engine glow on the warp drive of these starships. I prepared several shades of this kind of light blue that I can use in varying degrees. And since most of the painting is already set up underneath it, you have a lot of latitude on how you blend and make a nice glow effect. I do touch this up several times later in the process and in the painting itself, and in a final detail pass that I made outside of this recording, I did a few touch-ups, but this was enough to get a real good glow, not only on the engine itself, but kind of on some of the other areas of the hull where you could maybe actually see some of that light as it's really projecting this light blue. And now the first white bits in windows and other glowing bits on the starship itself. I can still just barely see the marks where these windows are supposed to fall, and I know in my head which ones I'd intended to actually have lit and which ones I wanted to leave alone. But once you get the white on the ship, the sort of window effect, it really starts making it come to life. At least to me, that's sort of a point where I get really excited about it, and it stops feeling like a mess and more like something that's actually real, kind of the way I intended it to. And finally, after that particular section, I decided to go in and do the cloud work on the planet itself. Just like the ship, the planet's had enough time to dry where I can come in and add details over all of the land masses and rivers and oceans of this very strange world. So I'm using a fan brush, kind of trying to get the clouds to be sort of flat and bunched together as much as possible on the edge of the horizon, and maybe more poofy and better defined the closer you get to the middle of the planet itself. And here again, we have another break where I let the painting sit for a couple of days, and I'm going back in on the nebula in the background to pull out highlights and maybe the occasional dark shadow pieces. This is a pretty important step, and I picked up this trick from a lot of landscape painters who will work on clouds over landscapes, different sky effects. But basically you want to come in and call out the places where there's real hot spots of light and shadow, just kind of working gently, a little bit at a time. As you can see, I'm working right now on the hottest core of the nebula itself. This is presumably where there would be a very bright star behind some of these clouds, kind of trying to really punch those areas. But I also do the same with the lighter filaments as we get further away from this hot core, and in each case, by adding a little touch of the highlight and little touches of shadows, it kind of gives these areas a little bit more life. Mostly I'm using a transparent white here, a little touch of yellow, just to keep it in that warm color, at least on the orange and red parts on the top. I do the same thing below, but I adjust the colors with some magentas and blues. And now we come back to a final detail pass on the Voyager itself. I corrected a couple of small windows on the bottom of the ship that were kind of off based on my original drawing. And I have a number of other colors for a lot of other small details, insignia, banners, and little bits that actually have specific colors. And as much as possible, I referenced images of the Voyager ship itself. Plus, I had a couple of diagrams given to me that provided detail on the Aero shuttle, which is mostly seen in line format, just underneath the front end of the ship itself. And I'm using a classic maul, also known as a wooden yardstick, to give myself something to hold my hand while I paint some of these fine details, as some parts of the painting were still wet. And of course, no space painting would be complete without the addition of stars in the background. And this is everybody's favorite, coming in and adding some of the stars to really make that space area come to life. I like to come in and paint a few hero stars, the ones that are the brightest, kind of put them where I'd like them to. Some of the larger ones have little halo effects behind them, so that they blend nicely into the background. As you can see, I'm putting a few on over some of the wet areas on the painting itself. And then I come back in for a final pass with a fan brush, and I try to flick in as gently as possible some of the finer detail stars to really make this look like some point in deep space. And with the final star spattering effect, that concluded the live version of the painting. I did finish a few details off camera before the final result, which if you'd like to see it is now up on my website. There'll be a link in the description below where you can check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you enjoyed this little tour of my Voyager painting. Take care.